Hi, my name is Vijay Gandhi. I'm going to show you some features of this new programming language called Kotlin. So if you're looking for a way to improve your development experience, I have a solution for you, which is to use Kotlin. So Kotlin is a new language which is statically typed. So you get all the benefits of using Java. So Kotlin is a JVM language, so it can be compiled to JVM bytecode, and it's also supported with Android runtime. So it's also supported with the Android Dalvik environment. So you can have your program and then run it on both server side if it supports if you're running it on a JVM, and you can also write client side applications which are on Android. So it was developed in 2011. It was developed by this company called JetBrains, and it has got like very good support by JetBrains recently. And if you look at the Google, if you look at the trends on Stack Overflow for Kotlin, you see that it is becoming more and more. It is being used more and more in past few years. You see a spike around like end of 2017, and that's because Google announced their official support for Kotlin on Android. So you can, so it's completely supported. It's backwards compatible with JDK 6 as well. So you can have like even older versions of Android run on Kotlin. So I'll be showing you some demos which will show different features of Kotlin. So let me start with like a Hello World demo. Okay, so Kotlin files. So the source code for Kotlin, it gets saved with this file extension called .kt. And let's say I want to write a Hello World. So I would create a new function called fun. And then let's say I'll call it main. And then similar to like Java, I can pass in arguments to this method. So I will say args, and then I want to pass that as a string array of strings. I would say array of string, and then within that I can type println, and then I would say hello world. So that's all I need to do to like create a hello world application. So let's compare this code with like a Java code. Not here. So I lost that Java code somewhere. Anyway, so with Java code, you basically have to go to this ritual of creating a new class. But with Kotlin, you don't have to do that. You can start right away with creating a function. And then you notice some things like in this Kotlin source code, we are missing semicolons. So we don't really have to like put semicolons in the end. So basically that's like one of the philosophy of Kotlin, which is to write less code. And this is like just one small example of it. Now I'm going to use Android for developing an application. So the app that I'm going to build, it will look like this. Here, yeah. So I have a map here, and then I also have some feature layers added to it. So the feature represents different countries, and once click on any of these countries, it will show a hello world dialog. And depending on the country or depending on the language for that country, I will display hello world in different styles. So one nice thing about Kotlin is that it is interoperable. So we have runtime SDK library, which is available in Android. So that is completely written in Java. Now I can consume that Java code and write my application in Kotlin. So first of all, I have to go and provide the dependencies for my Android project. So in here, I've added the Kotlin dependency. So that's provided by the JetBrains library. So I've included that. And then I have included the runtime SDK library. So in here, I have the path. In here, I have the path for the runtime SDK library. Again, that's completely written in Java. Okay, so now I have a main activity here. So this shows the application that I've written. So the layout of my app activity is pretty simple. I just have a map view within it. And then from the main activity, I basically have to set up the map view first. So for that, I have to create a map. So one of the data that I have in my map is a feature layer. So I create a URL for that. So notice how we define a variable in Kotlin. So we just say val and a URL, and then pass in the value. So the type of URL is kind of derived from the value which I have on the right side. So you don't have to specify this type like string URL in this case. And I've defined this as a val, which means that it can be set only once. So it's basically a final field. So if I try to set URL again to some other value, I will get a compile time error that I cannot change this value anymore. If I didn't want this value to be a final, instead of val, I should have declared it as var. Okay. So now I have the URL, and then the next step for me is to create a table which will represent the data source of all the data that's coming from that URL. So notice here I'm creating a new instance of service feature table. So unlike Java, I don't have to pass in like a new keyword here. I can simply call the type and then pass in the arguments that are required for the constructor. So in this case, I just have to pass in the URL. So I just simply say val table equal to service feature table, and that will create a new instance of service feature table. And then from the data source, I create a layer which will be used to symbolize the data on the map. And then similarly, I create this map wherein I create a new instance of ArcGIS map. And then finally, I want to add this layer as to the map. So for that, I'm adding it as an operational layer to the map. So if I had to do this in Java, it would have the source code would have looked like this. So I would have said map.get operational layers. I would have to say get operational layers, and then I would have I would have called get on that. But with Kotlin, you don't have to go through this get and set methods anymore. So you can just directly use it as if it was a field on the map. So I just call map.operationallayers.add and then layer. Great. So I have the view which was configured in my activity. So I set the map on that. And then finally, what I'm doing here is that I'm trying to set up a touch listener. So this touch listener will show the pop-up basically. So I have something called as a world detector. So it's a generic class. So it's a new class that I created here, world detector, which extends the default map view touch listener. And then within that, I'm overriding this method called onTap_confirmed. So basically, whenever I click on a map, this method will get executed. So let me compare this class to like a Java source code. So okay, yeah. So on my left side is the Java code, where if I want to extend a class, I have to declare the class and then provide extends, and then I have to say that it extends this class called default mapview touch listener. So in Kotlin, I can directly call. So instead of using the extends keyword, I would use this colon and then specify the base class name that I want to extend. Okay, so that's a difference on like how to create a class. Great. Okay, so right now I'm displaying this hello world, which is all in lowercase. Let's say I want to change the casing of this hello world. Let's say I want to display the first letter in H, the first letter in hello, like H and world, and the first letter W in world as capital. So let's say I want to create a function that will basically change this to a camel case. So I can do that with something called as an expression extension. So for that, what I will do is I'll create this function. I have this extension function here, and then create this like that. So basically what I've done is I've basically extended this string type, and then I've added this method called Camel Case on that. So now write in hello world string, I can invoke this method. So I'll say dot, and then I can say Camel Case. So what this will do is it will basically turn this hello world, and then it will change the case for a couple of letters. So the traditional way, if I had to do this in Java, would have been that I would have used like an object-oriented approach where I would like extend the string class and then add this method to that. So instead of an object-oriented approach, in this Kotlin case, I'm using like more like a function-oriented approach. So I added a new functionality to the string class, basically by simply by declaring a new function. So this is really great. So this is really good for like if I want to discover what are the different functions available on a particular data type, I can do that. I can also do this on like classes which are declared final. So internally in the backend, the Kotlin will basically generate like a static function that will accept the value as an object and then do some processing on that. So I can also apply this technique on final classes. Okay. Now, so now instead of using a world detector, let me change the touch listener, and I'm going to call this a country detector. So what this will do is it will run this identify operation on the feature layer and give me corresponding country value. So in this case, I have this class called country detector, which extends the default map view touch listener. Now in this case, I'm passing an additional argument called feature layer. So let me show this in Java first. Okay. So I'm passing an additional argument called feature layer to this constructor. Now I'll be using this feature layer whenever there's a touch or tap event on that. So for that, I need to create this field, local field called feature layer. And within the constructor, I initialize that field like this. So this dot layer equal to layer. So the same thing in Kotlin would look like this. So I have a constructor for country detector, and one of the fields is layer. Now within this, I can declare something called private val layer. So it will automatically set the value on this layer when I create a new object of type country detector. And this field layer would be available throughout this instance of object. So now when I call, when on single tap gets called, I run this operation called identify on the map view and pass in the layer, which was passed into the constructor. And then I call, and then I call the identify on that. So once I have the result, I can process the result. Okay. So whenever we return like async operation, we want to add like a done listener to that to get notified whenever we have result to process. So in this case, the done listener, it accepts a runnable. So which is a standard Java runnable. So in case of Java code, it looks like this. So I have to create a new instance of runnable, and runnable has only one method, which is run. So I know that I have to override that method and then write code like this. So in Java, I have to write all this boilerplate code like new runnable and then write this run method. But with Kotlin, it is smart enough to know that the input is of argument type runnable. So I don't have to write all that boilerplate code of overriding the method. I can simply enclose this code within like a runnable and then pass in all the code for that method in there. Even better, I don't even need this runnable defined here. So I can just remove that, and then Kotlin will automatically convert this code, and then it will create a new instance of runnable using this logic that I passed in here. Great. Okay, so now that I have the result, I want to extract the data out of that. So I basically so with the identify operation, there could be like more than one element at that point. But I'm just interested in the first one. So I can simply say get the result, get all the elements in that, and then get the first element in that, and then I will get the corresponding element here. Now in Java, it looks like this. In Java, I had to call get of 0, and then call get elements on that, and then call get of 0 again. So using this get of 0 is not very readable. It's much better with something like this first, which will get me the first element. Okay, great. So now I have the data from the service. Let's say I want to create a corresponding view. I want to create a corresponding view model for that. So I have a class called country. So let's see how would you create a class in Java first. Okay, so I have this class that I created in Java. So it has like two fields, name and the ISO code, the two-letter code. So these two are mandatory right now. And so I have a constructor that accepts these two values. And I have various different elements in here. Like I have the getters and the setters. And then I have the equals method and the hash code method. Now let's say I want to extend this class. I want to add a new field now. So let's say I want to add something called language. So I'll say private string language. So now I want to keep this as an optional. So I would retain this constructor, and then I would create a new constructor. And this time I will I'll add this value called language, so the user can pass that. And then I would say this dot language equal to language. Now I want to generate getters and setters for that. So what I would do is I can use the tools here, and then I can go to generate, and then I would say generate getter and setter to language, and then it generates that. And then I can go through the remaining source code and see that, I also need to update this equals and hash code. So you have to do so much work just to add a new field. Now let's see how we can get this done in Kotlin. So in Kotlin, so instead of writing hundreds of lines of code, all I have to do is I have to declare that class as a data class, and then simply provide the fields that are in there. So right now, so let's say I have these two fields. I have a string and I have a name and ISO. So these are required fields, and in case I want to add a new field, I can simply add that like this. So I say var lang string, and then I can pass in a default value of en. So this will automatically create two constructors. So the first constructor will have the name and ISO, and the second constructor will have the name, ISO, and the language. And in the first constructor, it will automatically set the value of language to English. And then I don't even have to worry about the equals and hash code, because Kotlin will generate for me in the backend. So every time I have to add a new field, I simply write one line of code to do that. So in here, so I'm passing string equal to en, so that's the default value. So that means that it's an optional value. Okay. Okay, so yeah, I had to make one change to pass in the layer to this detector. Okay, so now that I have data from the feature service, I'm using that value to create a new object of type country and passing in the two attributes. Great. Okay, so now let's say I have to abstract. Okay, so now depending on the country, I want to generate a hello world message. So for that, I'm going to create a singleton. So I have a singleton class called greeter, which will accept country as the input, and then it will give me a string for that country. So first of all, let's see how do you create a singleton in Java. Great. Okay. So there are many ways to create a singleton in Java. So one of the ways is this. So I create a class for which I want the singleton. I declare the constructor of that class a private, so that nobody else can instantiate that. And then I will lazily create a new instance of greeter Java by having this nested class called greeter Java lazy. And within that, I have a field called instance that will actually create the instance of the class that I'm interested in. And then I will add this method called getInstance that will return the field from the inner class getInstance and then return that as the instance. So if I want to call this method foo from some application, I would say greeter java.getInstance.foo. So that's the way you do it in Java. But it's much easier in Kotlin. So with Kotlin, all I have to do is I have to create a class called greeter, and then I have to declare that of type object. So if I do that, it is a singleton. So whenever I want to, let's say if I want to access a method called foo on greeter, I would say greeter.foo, and that will execute that. Great. Okay. So going back here, so I'm calling greeter.greet on the country. So if I go to that method, in here I have mappings. I have this mapping which basically maps the string to be used for a given country. So for US, I have hello world, which is in English, and for French, I have something else. For Indian language, I have something else. So I can declare a map like this. So I have a map called hellos, which is a map string by string, and then if I don't want to initialize that right away, I can have this thing called delegation. So within that, I say by lazy, which means hellos will be initialized only when I use it for the first time. So I don't have to write that logic in my code for initialization. So within the greet method, I would say hello I look at the ISO value of the country, and then if it is null, so this means that if the previous value, that is, if this value is null, then use this as the default value. Otherwise, use whatever value that was returned from this map, and then combine that with this country name. So if I run this application now, and then go back to the emulator, and then if I once a feature layer is loaded, and if I click on a country, so for United States it shows this, and then if I click on, let's say, France, it shows the corresponding message for that, and then for India, I'm using something else. Great. Okay. So far I showed you demos on using Android Studio on Android. Kotlin is also supported on other IDEs like IntelliJ. So if I have to use JavaFX, we support that as well. Let me switch to this IDE, which is IntelliJ. So we have lots of samples available on GitHub. So one of the sample is this, which is in Java. So I can just get the source code. I'll copy the Java source code, and then I'll come back to my IntelliJ, and then let's say I create a class, a Java class, distance composite symbol sample, so which is the name of the source code that I just got, and then I'll replace this source code with this. So this is running on JavaFX now. Now IntelliJ and Android Studio, they have very good support for Kotlin. So one of the features they have is to convert Java code to Kotlin code. So I can simply go to code and then click on this Java file to Kotlin file, and it will convert all this to Kotlin source code. Now it's not completely supported in JavaFX. I have to make one change here. So instead of passing this arguments, I will pass the class, and then I need to update the data path where I have this file which the sample uses. So I'm just going to use something I have on my local file. Great. Okay. And then I'll simply do a right click and say run, and then that will compile this Kotlin code and then instantiate this JavaFX application. So this basically shows this model, a distance-based model, where the symbology changes based on the distance. So if I zoom in, so right now it's a point. So if I zoom in, okay, let me start this again because I changed the camera control. So you see this plane. So if I zoom out, it will change the symbology of that from plane to a cone. And then if I move farther away from a cone to a point. So yeah, so basically all these IDEs, they have great support for Kotlin. Great. Okay, so I showed you some of the features of Kotlin. So I showed you that it can be, it's very expressive. You don't have to like create object for everything that you need. It's more function oriented. It's interoperable with Java, so you can mix and match Java code and Kotlin code and work, and that can work together. It has good support for different IDEs. And finally, really, the main reason would be that Google is committed to Kotlin. They announced support for that during the last conference. And they've been adding more and more features to that. So going forward with Android, we'll see more and more Kotlin being used in Android application development. Yeah, so that's all the demos I have for this Kotlin. So if you have any questions, let me know. Yeah, yes. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
So, all looks great. It's fantastic. What hiccups have you seen? Are there things that you feel like, well, that are not quite ready, or problems you've run into? Essentially, converting legacy code that looks
Java.
That looks great, but
yeah.
Is that real?
Okay. Yeah, initially when Kotlin was released, there were some issues with like compilation times, and there was some overhead with the runtime. But with all the improvements that they've done recently, I think that has much improved. Other than that, yeah, I've been writing like mostly samples right now. So we are like exploring at this stage. So we haven't like really seen much issues with that because, yeah.
So you haven't really done necessarily any big like production app that has worked its way through Kotlin or porting of anything. It's not like you've taken collector for Android and tried to port the code.
Oh, actually, yeah. So our app team, development team, they do use that. Do you have some inputs from that? Or, yeah.
So you port all the code into all of it? So you could have both lines, like you're saying? So you could write, if you've got to make a new class or a new activity or something, you're doing it in Kotlin.
Yeah. Yeah, and there are like lots of other companies as well in the industry that are going with this approach where they have like a mix of Android code, the Kotlin code and Java code running together. Yeah. Yeah. You have questions? You don't have? Yeah. Oh, okay, great, thanks. Does it work for iPhone? So Kotlin can compile to native code, and they have support for iOS as well. But yeah, I've not explored that option. They have something called Kotlin native. So with that, they compile the Kotlin code to native machine. Yeah. Any other questions? Great. Thanks for coming.